Eisenberg from the Association of School Psychologists of Pennsylvania. I am very excited to be here today to host a conversation with our School Psychologist of the Year, Dr. Nikole Hollins-Sims. We are here with one of our past presidents, Dr. Jason Peterson, and our incoming president, Dr. Amber Sessoms, as well as Georgia Jones, a student from one of Dr. Hollins-Sims' school psych training programs, Millersville University. So let's learn more about Dr. Hollins-Sims. Dr. Peterson, take it away.
Thank you, Rachel. So we are very excited today to be back for another spotlight interview with you, Dr. Hollins-Sims. Last year, we interviewed you after you were awarded the inaugural Emerging Professional for Outstanding Commitment to Anti-Racism in School Psychology by Division 16 of the American Psychological Association. You shared about your background at that time, but can you give us another quick summary about what you do as a school psychologist, since we know your role is slightly less traditional right now?
Absolutely. So as I think about my former role in practicing school psychology when I was a traditional school psychologist, I'm always thankful for that experience because it has really shaped and defined the current role that I occupy now. And in that role, I really have to be a systems level thinker. And in being that systems level thinker, I'm able to utilize what I call my favorite tenet of school psychology, and that's consultation. And so being able to watch change happen and see people evolve and emerge has been just so rewarding to me. And so as I think about the background that school psychology foundationally set for me in this current role, it just can't be explained in words. Like I just can't be in this role without school psychology. And so my current role is serving as special assistant to the Secretary of Education in the Pennsylvania Department of Education, and really focusing on equity, inclusion, and belonging in the educational ecosystem. And so as you think about an ecosystem and a systemic approach to everything, I just feel like as a school psychologist, I've been primed for a role as this. So just very happy to be in the role, and also very happy that I'm elevating school psychology in the process.
Excellent. So in that role, can you tell us a little about what that work really means to you?
Yeah, so equity, inclusion, and belonging is imperative. There's not really an option. And so when we think about, where we're at as a country and maybe some of the misunderstandings that might be out there regarding equity, inclusion, and belonging, I feel like it's my calling to help people understand what it is and why we have to do it. And for some, it may be they may have fear that they're going to lose something by giving more or giving less to other people, when in reality, we're all succeeding when all of those tides are moving at a pace that allows for the ships to be elevated. And so it's been a rewarding process. It's had its share of challenges, but I really enjoy the work because I'm able to meet all different types of people. And in that meeting them, they represent libraries, higher education, early childhood. And so exposing, again, school psychology to folks who may not necessarily know what it is we're capable of doing has been an amazing opportunity that I wouldn't trade.
Yeah, and for those of you who have not had the opportunity to see Dr. Hollins-Sims at work, it's an amazing thing to do. The intelligence, the grace, the compassion, the drive that she brings to everything she does it has raised our profession exponentially, more so than so many things that we have done or tried. So it's a credit to our field. So having said that, so what is the best part about being a school psychologist?
I love this question because it's hard to narrow it down. Because one thing that I can remember, and Georgia, you can appreciate this, when you're an intern, you get all tons of advice from people that are in the field or new to the field, et cetera. And one of the pieces of advice that I got was you need to be Johnny on the spot. You need to know everything and try your best to address it as best you can. And the reason you're seen as Johnny on the spot is because our skill sets are so dynamic. And I often say in any session that I'm in that we are the most qualified folks in the educational field. And I know that's going to maybe rub some feathers the wrong way, but when I think about all that we have to know systems, we have to know individual supports, we have to know how best to support teachers. And we're doing all of these things in tandem. And so it's just interesting to me as I think about the best part about being a school psychologist is that I'm not one dimensional. I actually have the ability to think on my feet and on my toes and have that consistently be honed and enhanced as I learn and grow. So being a school psychologist is something that you'll always cherish. Even if you get burnt out at times, there are skills that you will always refer back to that you wouldn't have learned anywhere else unless you were trained as a school psych.
And it's just so fabulous just hearing you talk in these short minutes that we've started, that you can get a glimpse and understand why you're School Psychologist of the Year. So, and thinking about that, right? So what does being the School Psychologist of the Year mean to you?
Wow. So speaking to another School Psychologist of the Year, it means everything. I can remember seeing folks like Dr. Peterson receiving those awards and other colleagues and feeling like that was the epitome of Pennsylvania school psychology. This is the top of the line. These are the people that are making the most significant change. And so when I put myself in that mix of people, I'm humbled first and foremost by it, but then I'm also excited because I'm seeing a shift in our state around who should be School Psychologist of the year, and having that expanded view, I think has been a long time coming. So Dr. Sessoms, with you blazing the trail as the first Black woman as School Psychologist of the Year, and for me to follow right after you, I think says a lot about where we stand as a state and how we're looking to see change. And that change can look and sound and be any type of person that is engaging in this work. And I think it's imperative that as we wear these crowns, Jason will laugh because I said we wear crowns. Like I want a crown. I wish I had one right now. But we wear them and we represent something that's so important for other students that are eventually going to come into the field to say that it's possible and that I don't necessarily have to stay in a box. I can use school psychology in a multitude of ways and benefit education in that same way.
And that's so powerful. I'm sitting here like, amen, right? Preach. Jason and I were on a call with Dr. Celeste Malone. I say if behind the scenes, I call her Celeste, but because she's my BFF in my head. But in thinking about that, so I see you, right? You're on that same level. I always call you and joke and say you're my mentor. And just the level of what you're even talking about, the intersectionality and how she's bringing that to the field as a Black woman and to be seen in what you're doing and what you've accomplished and how that just breaks down all these barriers. It disrupts the narrative that we need to stay in this box. And then that you're so beyond the traditional role of a school psychologist, it is just amplifying and making us feel seen in a way that is healing. So I just really appreciate your willingness. And then you say that you're humble. I think about like your intention for this work, right? Like you're intentional about what you do. And can you speak to that a little bit when you're thinking about your professional accomplishments, but the intention behind that, I feel like has really led you to where you are today, because you've always been intentional about putting and fill in the blank there, but your intentions in this work.
Yeah, and I think you have to. I think it's very clear to people when you're not genuine and when you have a hidden agenda or a different motive. And so I think I've been able to do what I've done because people see that there is a genuineness about me and that I do want what's best. I'm not just saying it to benefit one group of students or one particular demographic. I want everyone to succeed, and especially youth. Because I think about all of the youth that we've encountered as school psychologists, but also as students ourselves. You know, we've seen the students that were sitting next to us in the desk that we knew weren't getting what they needed. And how horrible is that? When we think about a public school system where we should be able to have the access and the opportunities, that has always been a driving force. And I think I've just always had the heart for seeing, for lack of a better word, underdogs ascend and make the strides that they need to make. And so in the work that I'm doing now, I know there are people who are adamantly opposed to what it is that they see me representing. But at the end of the day, I have to stay grounded in my why. And most recently, my why has been my 4-year-old. But prior to him, it was just seeing students that I knew were definitely not getting what they needed. And in that not getting what they needed, were on trajectories to all types of negative outcomes that ultimately impact all of us. And so when we're not thinking about that and we're one-sided and focused on one piece of the pie that we think is just for us, we're neglecting the rest of society and making it a better world for everyone. And so that's the mantra that I live by. And it's going to sound cliche, but I am a huge fan of Michael Jackson, and I'm going to say it out loud. And I think about his song, Man in the Mirror. And it resonates with me because I have to look at myself to make that change. And I want to help others do that same thing.
And that's just resonating so deeply with me, that about that humanity, that piece you talk about belonging. And in your interview in October, how you talk about, the Chronicle and Cobb book, how it's just really resonating, that birthright of dignity being a birthright. And again, going through that intersectional lens and what you represent, that you're looking out, that you don't want to see any student dehumanized. So I feel like that is really like feeding your spirit, right? Keeping you going in this work, is that you're able to see the humanity and bring other people along and usher them in to see the humanity. Because you said before, and again, I wrote it down, you said my calling, and that really piqued my interest. This is my calling, and you're inherently gifted for that. So I just thank you and appreciate the groundwork that you have done for all of us to see beyond what our roles are, and that to bring all of us into the fold to see the belonging. So just thank you just for the work that you do.
Thank you. It's mutual.
And I'm going to just jump in here and ask, how did your graduate training influence your work? And I'm also interested in the work that you did through your doctoral studies as well. So how did that influence your work?
Oh boy, so I have to do a little bit of a time machine trip. So it used to feel very recent, and it doesn't feel as recent anymore. But when I think about my time at Millersville, for instance, when I was obtaining my master's and my certification, I can remember graduate training for me at first was daunting. So thinking about our statistics courses and things like that, I didn't know if I was cut out for what I thought I wanted to do as a career, because I was always very math phobic. And so I felt like stats was going to take me out. But what I found was that if I simply just took the time and found partners in my cohort and we worked together and studied together, it didn't feel as daunting. But through the graduate training that I received, I can honestly say that one of the best courses that I had, and it's escaping me right now the full name, but I can remember we were sitting in a class and we were talking about our stories. And as I think about our stories and how we had to kind of talk about how we arrived at school psychology, I felt like hearing from my counterparts, that was so helpful for me, because it helped to create, as Dr. Sessoms was talking about, that intentionality. Because through their stories, they were sharing how school created this process for them and how they connected to education and all of those pieces. And so for me, I said, what is my story? And I hadn't really thought about it until we were in that course. And I think it was group processes. And so when we think about those group processes and how we have to interface together and make changes together, that was a course that really helped me as I thought about systems and thought about people and how you have to be able to connect with people. So that's one piece. The other was the assessment course, because that set my foundation. So sitting in clinics and evaluating certain students and getting used to that one-on-one with students and seeing the test results and having to analyze them, that was another key point. And at first I was super excited about giving my first IQ measure. And now when I look back at that, the evolution, we evolve in this field as we should. And so I see that evolution in me. And then as I think about my graduate work at IUP for my doctoral classes, I had the amazing privilege of studying under Dr. Joko Valesky. And when I say that out loud, when I was in it, you felt it, but then you come out into the field and you say his name and it's like he's like the school psychology god. And so to be able to study under him and get a full understanding of MTSS and what does that really mean? And how do you expand the role of school psychology to be that person at data tables? And I think of Dr. Peterson and his book around data-driven schools and how we have to have a role in this. That was so critical for me. And so when I think of those two experiences, both radically different, but yet created this, I don't know, synergy of what school psychology has come to represent, which is we need to know how to do all of these things to be an effective practitioner. So I really credit my doctoral experience on getting me to this place around systems, but can never forget the foundation that was set at Millersville.
And I also wanted to ask, so what was one challenge that you faced your first year working, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, okay. So my first year working, wow, I was assigned K-12 emotional support. So that was a challenge in and of itself. And it wasn't necessarily the students. I'm going to be 100% transparent now. It was the viewpoint that I was young and new, and adults that have been in the district for a while saw me as someone who didn't have the competency. And so that became a challenge because I was also growing and learning the school district and all of the things that come with that, on top of navigating a structure that had been in place K-12, needing to know how to navigate all these different adult personalities that were teaching each one of those different classrooms. And so part of the role I had to do was go in and do, for instance, group processes with the students that were a part of those classrooms. And a lot of times the teachers would get up and leave when I came in, because it was almost like, well, she's got it now, I get a break. And that was challenging because here I am, 25, coming into this classroom with kids that were like this, towering over me, but I never had an incident. And I always thought about that. And I said, what is it that they see in me that they felt comfortable enough that I was okay? Where I had observed them in classroom settings and we could see the outbursts and the behaviors and all of those things. But there was something about when I came in. Now, it wasn't all roses every day, but I will say that the challenge that I found was this need to prove myself, to prove my competency. And so as a first year, you kind of are in that proving ground. And sometimes if you can find that one small thing that you do super well, that others go, huh, I didn't know she could do that. That tends to be the way to open the door for other opportunities. And in my case, expanding the role.
So you did touch a little bit on this already, but what advice do you have for school psych students or those who are early on in their careers going into this field?
Yeah, so I can remember sharing in another interview about the power of like phone a friend. And what I mean by that is having someone that you connect to right away. So whether that's your mentor, let's say, or whether that's another person in your building, like the reading specialist or the speech therapist, or even the principal, having that one person to kind of be able to bounce ideas off of and start to assert yourself as an expert is really critical. So again, that first year, you're really learning a lot about the climate of the building, how they view the school psychologist, what the previous school psychologist may have done, and what you may need to either keep doing or undo. All of those things come with that first year. And even on internship, they can happen that way too. And they prep you for the things that you decide in your career, the things that you know you want to do, and the things that you say, I will make sure that never happens on my watch. And so I would just say that if you had to think about advice, those would be the two key pieces. Find who you are, which takes time. It does take a ton of time. But in that first year, find out what it is you like about the role of school psychology, what parts you want to continue to enhance and grow, and have you be known by, so people can say, you know what, Georgia knows how to do fill in the blank. Let's go ask her. So making yourself as Jason would say, he can fill in this for me. What is it? Generally useful, right? Mm-hmm. Make yourself generally useful. And please give credit, because you always do. Go ahead, Dr.
Sorry,
Peterson.
that
Who said that?
that was Robert Bernreiter, who started the school psych program up at Penn State, and he came back for a lecture and said he knew the secret to school psychology as a field, and it was to be generally useful.
That's right. And that was advice that Dr. Peterson gave me in my doc internship. And so it has stayed with me. And so I hope that whoever is listening to this today, that it's something that you also can take with you, because it has made a difference in how I've approached this work.
So your role, as you've established at PDE right now, is very unique and thrilling, frankly. And your work prior to that at Patton has led to all of this and has been very different than our traditional school psych role. And is obviously, as you mentioned, has been focused almost exclusively of late on equity, inclusion, and belonging.
Right.
So in your lens, from your viewpoint, because you were obviously interfacing across the Commonwealth here, what is the most pressing issue related to equity that schools should be focusing on right now?
And I know I answered this before and it probably was different. So when I think about it now, I would say the most pressing issue is the need for districts to feel like they shouldn't do it anymore. And what I mean by that is there's so much pressure in society around even the word equity. And there's school board meetings where people are saying, why are we talking about this? I don't want this. And they're equating it with something different. And with that, you have school districts who feel as though, and I can understand it, they have so many things on their plate that they think equity is something that is sitting on the plate instead of it being the plate. And so they think, well, let's push that appetizer to the side. Remember, Amber, John Crown-Apple talked about the appetizer, that equity becomes the appetizer instead of the meal. And I see that. I see it as something that we can push to the side for now, and we'll wait till things calm down, and then we'll bring it back. And unfortunately, that isn't a choice, because if you're doing best practices for every student that you're serving, if you're upholding the mission and vision of your district, you're doing equity. And in doing equity, it's not simply checking the box that you're doing equity, you're ensuring that throughout your system, there are opportunities for whoever the student is to get what they need to be successful, whether that's resources, whether that's curriculum, whether that's fill in the blank. They're getting what they need and they're not being disproportionately in receipt of something that creates negative outcomes for them. And so I think the most pressing issue now is not to lose focus around that and make sure that we don't get distracted by all of the noise that we know is around this work. And I'm just really passionate about that because I see too much of it recently. And it worries me. It worries me a lot because when we start prioritizing certain groups over another, when it comes to levels of comfort, that becomes something we have to really evaluate. Because what are we saying? Even if we don't intend for it to say that, it says that certain groups don't deserve certain things. And that to me is not the purpose of education. And so if there's one thing that we need to be concerned about, it's being distracted and losing focus of what's really mattering at the time.
Wow, there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, just even the notion, I love the phrase that it's not an appetizer, that is in fact the meal. And I think that is a great way of describing it, because I think people often lose focus as to what it is. And I hear you when you say about people saying we should wait till things calm down. I'm trying to think of a time in the world where there was a calm period for anything. So I'm not exactly sure why that we would even try that. That makes no sense to me whatsoever. But I appreciate you're really helping people to recognize that, equity shouldn't be something that we do to people. It's something we do. It's who we are. It's how we approach the world. So thank you for that. So this is obviously very much related to that, which is if you're talking to school psychologists that are currently practicing, what is one thing you would tell them to do that would enhance their equitable practices and moving this ball down the field?
Yeah, so a couple things, but the main thing, you got to be at these data tables. We have too much expertise for us not to be at data tables. And what do I mean by data tables? I mean like team meetings or leadership team meetings at schools where you're evaluating maybe tier 1 data, universal screening data, disciplinary data, anything that gives you some insight as to the health of your system, you need to be there. And the reason I say that is because, again, our skill set is such that we can start to be the ones to ask the pertinent questions. Because so often when we sit at these tables and we're having discussions, it becomes problem admiration. And it's like, okay, well, they live in that neighborhood and not much we can do about that. That has nothing to do with what's within our locus of control. And Jason, in your book, I can remember there was a comment about not necessarily problem solving, but needs fulfilling. And I love that because what it does is it flips the narrative that I'm trying to solve something for you, whereas I'm looking at the needs that I'm seeing and I'm trying to figure out what will fulfill those needs so that we can all, again, rise the tide. And so for me, that's the biggest piece of advice. If you want to enhance equitable practices from a school psychology lens, you have to know how to detect those certain things, like detecting disproportionality, evaluating perception data, and being able to look for trends. And then saying, have we missed voices? Again, you're the one with those questions that nobody else wants to ask. And I often quote Dr. Sessoms, being that perpetual toddler, right? You're asking why 50 times in a row. And it's okay because someone has to ask the questions. Otherwise, the data will just live. It won't breathe. It won't have any utility. It'll just sit there and you'll be able to say that you did collect data, but what have you actually done with it? And have you listened to the story that it's telling? So for me, that's the biggest piece of advice around equitable practices. The other would be supporting teachers in a consultative role. And not just teachers, but also your MTSS teams, your administrators, around being culturally responsive. What does that look like? When you're doing curriculum, when you're teaching, when you've arranged your classrooms, have you been culturally responsive and thought that through? And that takes a level of competency on the school psychologist part too. So that's where that consistent learning has to happen. And we can't grow complacent in that learning. We're never going to know it all. So remaining humble to that is really, really important. So those would be the two things: understanding culturally responsive practices and being a data-driven practitioner.
Well, thank you, Dr. Hollins-Sims. What fantastic insights to leave us all with. And I appreciate everything that you've shared about your journey as a school psychologist from graduate school to your position now, and all of the fantastic impact that you're having across the state, and all the wonderful work that you're doing. So thank you. And thank you, Dr. Peterson and Dr. Sessoms and Ms. Jones. We so appreciate all of your participation in this conversation. I'm confident that everyone listening learned something new that they can bring with them in their practice. And thank you again.